She screamed, "Get down now!" and threw herself in front of a bullet meant for a mafia boss, collapsing in his arms as blood soaked through her apron. But 7 minutes later, when the shooter didn't flee and instead stayed to confirm his target, she realized the horrifying truth. The bullet was never meant for him. It was always meant for her. And the man she just saved is the only person who knows why a professional killer wants a broke waitress with nothing to her name dead. If you want to see how this waitress's entire world shatters when she discovers why a professional killer wants her dead, make sure to subscribe right now because what happens next will leave you breathless. And drop a comment telling me, would you risk your life to save a complete stranger? It was 11:23 p.m. on an autumn Thursday when Therese Miller's life ended and something else began. Matteo Ferrucci, a man whose tailored suit cost more than most people's cars, sat alone at the counter of Lou's 24-hour diner. He'd been nursing the same cup of black coffee for 20 minutes, his dark eyes scanning the street outside through the rain-streaked windows. His fingers drummed against the formica countertop in a rhythm that suggested impatience or danger, or both. That's when Therese, a waitress with tired eyes and medical bills she couldn't pay, made a choice that would destroy her old life forever. Through the diner's front window, she saw it, the glint of metal catching the streetlight. A rifle scope, pointed directly at the man sitting 3 feet away from her. Without thinking, without hesitating, Therese screamed 4 words that tore through the quiet diner like thunder. "Get down now!" Her hands hit Matteo's shoulders with desperate force, shoving him sideways off the stool. The bullet hit her before the coffee cup shattered on the floor. The entire diner went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every breath held. Therese collapsed against Matteo's chest, her white apron blooming red. The warmth of her own blood soaked through to her skin as her legs gave out beneath her. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the sharp, burning pain spreading through her shoulder and the stranger's arms catching her before she hit the ground. But instead of panicking, instead of screaming, Therese's eyes locked onto Matteo's face. And she saw something there that terrified her more than the gunshot wound: recognition. Not gratitude, not shock. Recognition. "You weren't supposed to do that," Matteo whispered, his voice carrying a weight that made her blood run colder than it already was. His hands pressed against her wound, but his eyes were scanning the street outside, calculating, hunting. Then something impossible happened. The shooter didn't flee. Through the diner window, Therese saw him adjusting his aim, still watching, still waiting. And his rifle wasn't pointed at Matteo anymore. It was pointed at her. Matteo's expression shifted to something that would haunt Therese for weeks to come. He pulled her behind the counter as the second shot shattered the window, where her head had been moments before. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice deadly calm as he reached inside his jacket. "And don't make a sound." Therese looked at the blood on her hands, then at the man she'd just saved, then at the shattered window. Her voice came out broken, confused, terrified. Who were they trying to kill? Matteo's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the answer she didn't want to believe. "You." Therese thought she was saving an innocent man from an assassination, but she just stepped into a war that began before she was born. And the stranger she saved? He's the only person who knows why she was marked for death. But to understand how we got here, to understand why a waitress became a target and why Matteo Ferrucci's hands shook as he carried her bleeding body into the night, we need to go back. Back to before the bullet, before the diner, and before the moment their fates collided. We need to talk about who Matteo Ferrucci really is. And more importantly, we need to talk about who Therese Miller's father was before he disappeared. Because this story doesn't start with a gunshot. It starts with a theft, a manhunt, and a promise made 20 years ago that no one intended to keep. Matteo moved before his mind could process the movement. Years of survival instinct took control as he dragged Therese behind a parked sedan, her weight suddenly heavy and limp in his arms. The second bullet hit metal inches from where they'd been standing, sparking off the car's frame with a sound that echoed through the empty street like a death sentence. "Stay with me," Matteo commanded, pressing harder against her wound. Blood seeped between his fingers, warm and accusing. Teresa's eyes were unfocused, her breathing shallow and irregular. He pulled out his phone with his free hand, never taking his eyes off the rooftop across the street. The call connected on the first ring. "Orchid Street. Now. Bring the medic." His voice was calm, controlled, deadly. The kind of calm that made people move faster because they understood what silence meant when Matteo Ferrucci stopped shouting. "Matteo?" Teresa's voice came out weak, confused. Her hand clutched at his jacket with surprising strength. You did this. You brought them here." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "But I'm going to find out who did." Her eyes were closing. "My sister, please. Someone needs to tell Emma. You're going to tell her yourself." Matteo shifted his position, shielding her body with his own as he scanned the surrounding buildings. The shooter was gone. He could feel it. But that absence worried him more than the presence had. Professional killers didn't miss twice. They left, which meant the shot that hit Therese wasn't a miss at all. 3 black SUVs materialized from the darkness within minutes, doors already opening before they fully stopped. Men in dark suits moved with military precision, forming a perimeter while one carried a medical kit directly to Matteo's side. "Boss, we need to move her now." The medic was already working, cutting away Teresa's blood-soaked uniform to assess the damage. Matteo stood, his suit jacket ruined with her blood. He addressed the man closest to him, a lieutenant named Vincent who'd been with him for 12 years. "She stays alive, no matter what. You understand me?" Vincent nodded, but his expression showed confusion. They didn't protect civilians. They especially didn't protect witnesses. "Get her to the safe house. Use the medical team we keep for family." Matteo's tone left no room for questions, though he could see them forming on every face around him. The safe house was a fortress buried beneath a legitimate office building Matteo owned downtown. Reinforced walls, secure exits, medical equipment that rivaled most hospital emergency rooms. It was where they took people who couldn't afford to be seen bleeding in public. By the time they arrived, Therese was unconscious. Matteo watched the medical team work with efficiency born from treating gunshot wounds in silence. No questions, no paperwork, no trail. While they operated, Matteo stood in the surveillance room, reviewing footage his tech specialist had pulled from traffic cameras and nearby security systems. He watched the sequence 3 times before the pattern became clear. The sniper had maintained position for 90 seconds after the shot, not fleeing, not panicking, watching, confirming. "He wasn't shooting at you, boss." The tech specialist, a woman named Chen, zoomed in on the rifle's angle. "Even before she moved, his trajectory was wrong for your position. He was aiming 6 inches to your left." "Where she was standing." Matteo's jaw tightened. "Where she was standing," Chen confirmed. Matteo stared at the frozen image of Therese throwing herself toward him, her face caught in an expression of pure, selfless terror. She'd thought she was saving him. She'd taken a bullet meant for her while trying to protect someone else. Something about her name scratched at his memory. Miller. Therese Miller. He'd heard that surname before, in another context, another lifetime ago, when he was younger and angrier and hunting ghosts that disappeared into smoke. The medical team finished just before dawn. Therese would live. The bullet had gone through her shoulder, missing major arteries by centimeters. Matteo stood outside the recovery room, exhaustion pulling at his edges, when Vincent approached. The lieutenant held a manila folder, his expression uncertain in a way that made Matteo's instincts sharpen. "Boss." Vincent hesitated, which was unusual for him. You need to see who her father was. Matteo took the folder, opened it, and felt the ground shift beneath 20 years of carefully constructed certainty. The face staring back at him from the faded photograph was a ghost he'd been hunting since he was 23 years old. A man who'd vanished with millions in syndicate money and secrets that could burn entire criminal empires to ash. Thomas Miller, the accountant who got away. The one failure Matteo had never been able to erase from his record. And Therese was his daughter. Therese woke to unfamiliar ceiling tiles and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Her shoulder screamed with pain as she tried to sit up, and the movement sent a wave of dizziness crashing through her skull. This wasn't a hospital. The walls were too thick, the silence too complete. Terror locked her muscles tight. Where am I? The door opened, and Matteo Ferrucci stepped inside. He'd changed clothes, though his eyes carried the weight of no sleep. You're safe. Safe? Her voice cracked. You kidnapped me. I saved you. The correction came out sharper than he intended. He moved closer, then stopped, as if remembering he wasn't supposed to be threatening. Softness didn't suit him. The people who shot you are still hunting. This safe house is the only place they can't reach. Therese's hand went to her bandaged shoulder, then to the IV in her arm. Everything felt wrong, disjointed, like waking up inside someone else's nightmare. My sister, Emma. She'll be worried sick. I need to call her. Your phone would be traced in seconds. Matteo pulled a chair over but didn't sit. Standing was easier. Control was easier. I'll have someone contact her through secure channels. She'll know you're alive. Why are you doing this? Therese searched his face for answers. You don't even know me. Matteo's expression hardened. I know who your father was. The words hung between them like a blade. My father left when I was 6, Therese said quietly. He was a mechanic. He wasn't anyone important. Thomas Miller wasn't a mechanic. Matteo's voice carried the weight of old rage, old failure. He was the Verona Syndicate's accountant. He kept their books, knew every dirty transaction, every buried body, every politician they owned, and 20 years ago he disappeared with evidence that could destroy half the criminal networks in this city. No, Therese shook her head, ignoring the pain it caused. You're lying. I was 23 when they ordered me to find him. Matteo's jaw tightened. It was my first major assignment. Track down Thomas Miller, recover what he stole. I spent 2 years following ghosts. I never found him. That failure has followed me ever since. The silence that followed was damning. Therese wanted him to be lying. Wanted her father to be the man she remembered. Quiet, kind, always smelling of motor oil. Not a criminal, not someone who would abandon his family to save himself. But Matteo's eyes told a different story. The kind of truth that destroyed the past and rewrote everything you thought you knew. There's more. Matteo leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. The man who tried to kill you isn't some random hired gun. His name is Ambrose Varon. He's a rival boss who's been searching for your father's hidden assets for decades. He thinks you know where they are. I don't know anything, Therese's voice broke. I was 6 years old. That won't matter to him. He'll keep you alive long enough to extract whatever information he thinks you have. Then you become a liability. The door burst open without warning. A tall man with cold eyes and a scar along his jaw stepped inside, his presence filling the room with immediate tension. This was Rufin Calder, Matteo's second-in-command, and he looked at Therese like she was a ticking bomb. We need to talk. Now. Rufin's tone was clipped, controlled fury barely restrained. She's a liability we can't afford. Hand her over to Ambrose. End this before it starts a war. No. The single word from Matteo carried absolute authority. Rufin stared at him. You're risking everything for a stranger whose father stole from us. This makes no strategic sense. I said no. Matteo straightened, and the air in the room shifted. She stays under my protection. Rufine's expression darkened, but he knew better than to push further. He left without another word, the door closing with controlled violence. Therese watched the exchange in stunned silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Why are you protecting me?" Matteo didn't answer immediately. His eyes had caught on something at her throat, a small pendant on a delicate chain. Old, worn, the kind of thing that should be meaningless. But it wasn't meaningless. He'd seen that symbol before. Years ago. In coded ledgers that no one could decipher. In documents Thomas Miller had created before he vanished. "That necklace," Matteo said slowly. "Where did you get it?" Teresa's hand went to the pendant instinctively, protective. "It was my father's. He gave it to my mother before he left. It's all I have of him." Matteo's mind raced through old memories, old case files, old failures. The pattern on the pendant matched encryption keys the Verona syndicate had used. Keys that required physical tokens to unlock. Therese Miller wasn't just the daughter of a ghost. She'd been carrying the key to her father's secrets around her neck her entire life. Therese waited until the guard outside her door changed shifts. 3 minutes. That's all she needed. Her shoulder protested every movement as she slipped through the safe house corridor, following exit signs she'd memorized during her waking hours. Matteo Ferrucci thought he was protecting her, but protection felt too much like captivity, and she'd spent her whole life fighting to stay free. She needed air, needed to see something familiar, needed to prove that her life hadn't completely dissolved into violence and secrets. The night air hit her lungs like freedom, cold, sharp, real. Her feet carried her toward Lou's diner without conscious thought, muscle memory pulling her back to the last place the world made sense. The alley behind the building smelled like grease and garbage, and every double shift she'd ever worked. Normal, ordinary, but ordinary died 3 nights ago. "Therese Miller." The voice came from the shadows above. She looked up and saw him. The sniper, perched on the fire escape, rifle aimed directly at her chest. He wasn't hiding this time, wasn't rushing. He wanted her to see him, to know. "Your father thought he could hide you." The sniper's voice carried casual cruelty. "Thought if he gave up everything else, we'd let his daughter live in peace." "Stupid man." Teresa's legs locked. Her breath stopped. "You knew my father?" "I watched him die." The rifle didn't waver. "He begged, said you didn't know anything, said please, please spare my daughter." The sniper's finger moved to the trigger. "Ambrose let him believe the lie before putting a bullet in his skull." Time crystallized. Therese saw the barrel, saw her death approaching at 3,000 feet per second. Then something hit her from the side with devastating force. "Therese, down!" Matteo's body slammed into hers, throwing them both behind a dumpster as the shot rang out. But this time, the bullet found its mark. Matteo grunted, his body jerking as the round punched through his side. He collapsed against her, his weight suddenly heavy and wrong. "No, no, no, no." Therese caught him, her hands immediately going to the wound. Blood soaked through his shirt, warm and too fast. "Matteo, stay with me." His face had gone pale, but his eyes were focused, calculating. Even bleeding out, he was thinking 3 moves ahead. The sniper was reloading. Therese could hear the mechanical click from above. "Your father died protecting nothing," the sniper called down. "Because you're about to join him." Matteo's hand moved inside his jacket. Therese didn't see him draw the gun, didn't see him aim. She only heard the shot and watched the sniper's body tumble from the fire escape, hitting the pavement with a sound that would haunt her forever. The rifle clattered beside the corpse. Silent. Final. Matteo's hand dropped, the gun falling from his grip. "Told you," he breathed, each word costing him. "Told you it wasn't safe." "You're an idiot." Therese pressed harder against his wound, her hands shaking. "You almost died for me." "You did die for me first." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Seemed only fair. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called the police. Someone always did when gunshots echoed through Chicago's streets. Therese held Mateo against her chest, feeling his blood seep into her clothes the way hers had seeped into his. The symmetry was cruel, perfect, binding them together in ways neither had chosen. "My father," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "He didn't leave us. He died trying to save us." Mateo's breathing was shallow, labored. "He loved you more than the money, more than his own life." Each word came slower. "Ambrose tortured him for 3 days. He never gave you up." The world Therese had built on abandonment and resentment cracked apart. Her father hadn't been a coward. He'd been a man who sacrificed everything, including his daughter's memory of him, to keep her breathing. "The pendant," Mateo managed. "It's the key. He died protecting it. Protecting you." Red and blue lights painted the alley. Footsteps approached. Voices shouted commands. Therese held Mateo tighter, this stranger who'd become her mirror, her protector, her only anchor in a collapsing world. His eyes were closing despite his efforts to keep them open. "Don't you dare die on me," she said fiercely. "You don't get to save my life twice and then leave." Mateo's hand found hers, blood slicked and trembling. Wouldn't dream of it. But his grip was weakening. And the sirens were too close, and Therese knew with absolute certainty that everything she thought she understood about her life had been a carefully constructed lie. And the truth was so much worse. Mateo didn't remember the ambulance, didn't remember the private surgical team Vincent had called, or the 6 hours he spent on an operating table while doctors extracted a bullet lodged 2 inches from his spine. He only remembered Therese's face, pale and terrified, as darkness took him under. When consciousness finally dragged him back 3 days later, the first thing he heard was shouting. The second thing was Therese's voice, sharp with defiance she shouldn't possess. "I'm not going anywhere." Mateo forced his eyes open. The recovery room was empty except for monitors beeping steadily beside him. But beyond the door, chaos was unfolding in voices he recognized too well. He disconnected the IV with shaking hands. Pain shot through his side as he stood, each breath a negotiation with damaged tissue. The doctors had left clothes folded on a chair. He dressed slowly, methodically, fury building with each second. By the time he reached the boardroom, his vision was swimming, but his purpose was crystalline. The door opened to reveal his entire inner circle gathered around the table. Rufin stood at the head, occupying Mateo's chair like he'd been born to it. Therese was backed against the wall, chin raised despite the fear in her eyes. "Boss." Vincent saw him first, relief flooding his features. "You shouldn't be up." Every head turned. The room went silent. Mateo pulled his gun from the holster Vincent had thoughtfully included with his clothes. He didn't aim it at anyone specifically, didn't need to. The message was clear. "Interesting meeting," Mateo said, his voice rough from disuse. "Someone want to tell me why it's happening in my boardroom without me?" Rufin's expression hardened. "You were unconscious. Decisions needed to be made." "What decisions?" Mateo moved further into the room, ignoring the way his legs threatened to give out. "She needs to go." Rufin gestured toward Therese like she was contaminated. "Every hour she stays puts us at risk. Ambrose wants her. Other families are asking questions. She's a liability we can't afford." "I decide what we can afford." Mateo's gun hand stayed steady even as the rest of him wavered. "And I decide who stays under my protection." "You're compromised." Rufin stood, shoulders squared for confrontation. "You took a bullet for a stranger. You're risking everything we've built because some girl saved your life once. This isn't strategy. This is weakness." The accusation landed like a slap. Around the table, men who'd followed Mateo for years shifted uncomfortably. Loyalty was built on strength, and right now Mateo looked like a strong wind could knock him over. Therese moved before anyone could stop her. She stepped between Mateo and Rufin, her bandaged shoulder visible beneath her borrowed shirt. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "You're right," she said to Rufin. "My father's crimes destroyed lives, stole futures, burned bridges you spent years building." She turned to address the entire room. "But hiding won't change what he did. Running won't make Ambrose stop hunting. The only way forward is through the truth." She looked back at Matteo, something fierce and desperate in her eyes. "If my father's sins destroyed your world, then let me help fix it. Let me find what he stole. Let me give you the leverage to end this." "You don't know what you're offering," Rufin said coldly. "The moment we start digging into your father's files, every rival family will come for us. For you." "They're already coming." Teresa's voice strengthened. "The sniper proved that. Ambrose won't stop. So either we find the evidence first and control how it's used, or we wait to die defending secrets we don't even possess." The logic was sound. Matteo could see it registering on faces around the room, but Rufin wasn't finished. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see that? Playing on your guilt because you failed to find her father 20 years ago. She's—" "Enough!" Matteo's voice cut through the room like a blade. He raised his gun, aiming it directly at Rufin's chest. "You seized power while I was unconscious. You ordered the execution of someone under my explicit protection. You forget who built this family." Rufin's face went pale. "Matteo, I was acting in our best interest." "Vincent, detain him." Matteo didn't lower the gun. "Underground holding. No communication. I'll decide his fate when I'm not bleeding through my stitches." Vincent moved immediately, along with two others. Rufin didn't resist, but his eyes promised future reckoning as they escorted him out. The remaining men watched Matteo with new wariness. The kind of fear that came from seeing your leader walk through death and emerge harder. "Anyone else want to question my decisions?" Matteo asked the room. Silence answered him. "Then get out, all of you." They left quickly, grateful for dismissal. When the door closed, Matteo's legs finally gave out. He caught himself on the table, breathing hard, pain screaming through his side. Therese was there instantly, her arm supporting him despite her own injuries. "You shouldn't have done that. You're hurt. So are you." Matteo looked at her, this woman who'd thrown herself into bullets and boardroom politics with equal recklessness. "But you're still standing." "Barely." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. They stood together in the empty boardroom, two people bound by violence and secrets, and something neither could name yet. Both broken, both refusing to fall. "Your father's pendant," Matteo said quietly. "We decode it tomorrow." Therese nodded, her hand going to the necklace at her throat. "And then?" "Then we find what he died protecting, and we use it to burn Ambrose Varen's empire to the ground." Lou's diner looked exactly the same. Same cracked vinyl booths, same flickering neon sign that buzzed like dying insects, same smell of coffee and grease that had soaked into the walls over decades. Therese tied her apron with shaking hands, wincing as the motion pulled at her healing shoulder. Her manager had called twice asking when she'd return. The bills didn't stop because she'd been shot. The rent didn't care about bullets and conspiracies, so she came back. Because normal was the only life raft she had left. "Table 6 needs refills," her coworker muttered, barely looking up. Therese grabbed the coffee pot and moved through the familiar routine. Pour, smile, pretend everything was fine. Pretend she hadn't held a dying man in an alley 4 days ago. Pretend her father hadn't been tortured to death protecting secrets she never knew existed. The bell above the door chimed. Matteo Ferrucci walked in, and every carefully constructed piece of normal shattered. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit, just dark jeans and a jacket that didn't quite hide the bulk of bandages beneath. He moved carefully, like someone relearning their body's limits. His eyes found hers immediately. Therese's hands tightened on the coffee pot. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." Matteo slid into the same counter seat where this had all started. Where she'd first seen the rifle scope, where her old life had died. You're still healing. So are you. She set a cup down harder than necessary. Coffee? Please. The normalcy of the exchange felt absurd, like playing house while the foundation crumbled. Therese poured his coffee, then glanced at her manager. I'm taking my break. She didn't wait for permission, just walked to the back booth, the one half hidden from the street, and waited for Matteo to follow. He sat across from her, wincing slightly. You can't pretend this isn't happening. Watch me. But her voice cracked on the words. Matteo's gaze dropped to her throat, to the pendant she always wore. Under the diner's neon lights, the etched pattern seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. He'd been thinking about it for days, running old memories through his mind like film reels. May I see it? He asked quietly. Therese's hand went protectively to the necklace. Why? Because I've seen that pattern before, in documents your father created before he disappeared, in encryption keys the Verona Syndicate used for their most sensitive operations. Her fingers trembled as she unclasped it. The pendant fell into Matteo's palm, heavier than it looked. He turned it under the light, examining the intricate scroll work that most would dismiss as decoration. It's a cipher wheel, he said, more to himself than to her. The outer ring rotates. He twisted carefully. Something clicked. The pendant's face separated into two pieces, revealing a hollow interior. Inside, printed on paper so thin it was nearly transparent, was a single line of text. Numbers. Coordinates. Therese stared at her father's handwriting, preserved for 20 years in a piece of jewelry she'd worn every day since her mother died. What does it mean? It's a location. Matteo's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Where your father hid everything, the money, the evidence, everything Ambrose has been killing to find. He gave this to my mother before he left. Therese's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She thought it was just a keepsake, something to remember him by. It was. Matteo looked up at her. It was his way of protecting you while giving you the only weapon that could save you if they ever came. He knew someday you'd need it. He died for this. The words tasted like ashes. He died because Ambrose tried to make him talk, and he chose you instead. Matteo reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The touch was electric, dangerous. Your father wasn't running from my family, Therese. He was running from Ambrose. And when they caught him, he died begging them to believe you knew nothing. He died protecting you. Therese broke then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse of every wall she'd built. Matteo's hand tightened on hers, steady when everything else was falling apart. I hated him, she whispered. I spent my whole life hating him for leaving. He never wanted to leave. He wanted to keep you alive. The diner hummed around them, oblivious to the moment fracturing between grief and something neither could name. Therese looked at Matteo through tears, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a mafia boss, not a stranger, just a man who'd taken a bullet for her. Who'd defied his own family? Who was holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping both of them anchored? What happens now? She asked. Matteo's thumb traced circles on her palm, unconscious and intimate. We follow the coordinates. We find what your father hid, and we use it to end Ambrose Varon. Across the city, in an office with bulletproof glass and artwork stolen from museums, Ambrose Varon answered his phone on the first ring. Speak. The voice on the other end was nervous. Matteo Ferrucci found the Miller girl, and he's protecting her. Ambrose's expression didn't change, but his grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles went white. Is she alive? Yes. Where? Unknown. He's moved her somewhere off-grid. Ambrose stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city lights. Then find them. Use every resource, every contact. I want Thomas Miller's daughter in front of me before the weekends. And Ferrucci? If he gets in the way, Eliminate him. Ambrose's voice was calm, almost gentle, the kind of calm that preceded massacres. I've been patient for 20 years. I won't wait any longer. The call ended. Ambrose stared at his reflection in the bulletproof glass, seeing the ghost of a man he'd tortured decades ago. Thomas Miller had died without talking, but his daughter would be more cooperative. They always were when you started hurting the people they loved. Back in the diner, Therese and Matteo sat in their booth, hands still intertwined, the coordinates between them like a roadmap to war. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Matteo said. "I know." "You could still walk away." Therese's grip tightened. "Could you?" Their eyes met, and the answer was clear. Neither of them could walk away. Not from this. Not from each other. War was coming, and they were standing together when it started.